So why everybody tells you that you have to use manual mode when starting out with photography? I give you 80% of all the knowledge you have to know in less than 7 minutes, and I tell you why you should avoid manual mode when starting out with photography. Every camera has a triad of settings: shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. These three form some sort of a triangle. If you adjust one of them, you have to adjust the other ones as well, so your image remains properly exposed. So first, let's have a look what these three settings actually do. The first thing we look at is the shutter speed of your camera. The shutter speed of your camera determines how fast the image is actually taken, and it stands literally for the amount of time it takes to take the image. 1/100 means the image is taken in 1/100th of a second. 1/1000 means it takes a millisecond to take the image. Most cameras range somewhere from 30 seconds all the way to something crazy fast like 9,000 of a second. Depending on the speed of your camera and what camera model you have, it's either a mechanical shutter, which closes the sensor, or an electronic shutter, which just reads out a sensor. Turn your shutter speed to something extremely fast, and you can freeze basically any object in the middle of time to a point where the wings of a bee in mid-flight become crystal clear. On the other side, you can take an extremely long shutter speed, several seconds, and you can see something which you wouldn't see otherwise with your naked eye, like the nebula of the Milky Way. But it also determines how much light enters the camera. Take extremely fast shutter speed and there's not enough time for light hitting the sensor, and your image becomes darker. Have a really long shutter speed and there's a lot of light hitting the sensor, probably overexposing your image. So the next thing we look at is what is the aperture. Even if you can set it on your camera, it is a property of your lens and determines how much of your image will be in focus. It is usually indicated by f-stops, ranging from f1 all the way to f22. You can see it more or less as an indicator how difficult it is to get something in focus. Put your lens in f2.8 and your focus plane becomes razor thin and makes it really hard to hit the right focus. But it also makes this beautiful separation between your subject and the background and creates this beautiful blurry, dreamy background you see in portrait photography. On the other hand, if you turn your aperture all the way up to f7 or f16, most of the image will be in focus, which is great if you want to showcase the overall scene like landscape or cityscape photography. Turn it up even more to f22 and basically everything is in focus. But now we're at a level where quantum mechanics makes your image slightly less sharp. The aperture changes the diameter of the hole inside your lens. An f2.8 is basically wide open, leaving a lot of light inside, making your picture really bright. All the way up to f22 and the hole inside your lens becomes tiny, leaving not enough space for a lot of light to pass through. Therefore, your image becomes really dark. You decided now on a shutter speed and an aperture, but your image is now extremely dark. So your next move would be to turn up the ISO, which is kind of a digital boost to the data we receive from the sensor. But turn the ISO up too much and your image becomes grainy. Since we're not only boosting the information we want to have, the beautiful image, we also boost the random noise a sensor receives. This leaves us with a grainy, less sharp image in the end. In general, we want to keep the ISO as low as possible. That doesn't mean as low as the camera can turn the ISO, but as low as possible for any given photo. We can work with a grainy, noisy image, but we cannot work with a blurry or out of focus image. Exposing a picture the right way is always a balance of these three settings. Now, most photographers will tell you you have to learn how to shoot manual and adjust these three settings in manual mode. But this advice is completely outdated. I'm a photographer and I basically never shoot in manual mode. Photography is way more about composition and storytelling than fiddling around with your camera settings. Imagine this, you are at a wedding, stuff is happening quick, people laugh, there's good mood, there are some tears flowing. It's a really emotional event and you want to capture these emotions. The last thing you want to do is to go to somebody and say like, hey, Do you mind? Can you cry again because my shutter speed was too slow and I didn't got a photo that right? Restaging a movement works in a studio environment with professional models and actors, but not in the real world. So what I did is 90% of the time my camera is an aperture priority, which means I only have to adjust the aperture, deciding how much I want to have in focus. My ISO is set to never go above 12,800 and my shutter speed to have a minimum of 1/150. This makes sure that all my images are not too grainy and the motion of my hands doesn't affect the clearness of the image and introduce some blur. With only one setting to adjust, I can spend less time looking at my camera screen and more time trying to find good photos, being in the moment and capturing the moments that actually matters. What also matters is you liking this video, comment down below what you want to see next, and subscribing for even more content like this.